but back to you.
Anyway, there you go. So straight into the webinar then. Basically, we're going to be talking about a few, first setting the scene, a few sort of major issues about online for business and how that scene is set at the moment, especially within Europe. And then straight into e-commerce, where it is in terms of for the consumer and for the business, for the company, and some of the main trends that we're seeing in that. And then we wanted to talk about key regulations and which routes to market are easiest to choose with an e-commerce solution. And then our final thing, just really a couple of tips and helpful hints about where you can get started, and practical tips about sort of, what are the first steps. And then we've left some time for questions and answers. But as Bill said, you can always jot a question into the chat box, and then we'll come up. Bill also didn't mention, I think we're going to do a couple of polls during the webinar, and we'll see how those go and try and orientate the webinar a little bit.
That's exactly right. I'll jump in if all the times we'll run these polls, and very keen to get some response from everybody, Susanna. So thank you for reminding me.
Yep. I just wanted to say, for us, we specialize in companies that export. What we know how to do is, what we've always done is help companies export from market A to market B, so bilateral trade. And it seemed to us that it goes without saying the companies have always got, fantastic products and they're great pricing, and let's say they've got some logistics in-house. So, what's missing? And for years and years, we focused on the visibility, the credibility, the accessibility of these products in the export markets. And this sort of light bulb moment happened. We said, in fact, what you need is a country-specific website to get you all that, to get your credibility and your visibility. And on that, you use it like a scaffolding to organize your sales, your marketing, and grow your brand. So that was this whole, this slide tries to just capture the key elements of a country-specific website. And of course, Europe is really perfect for online. Not only is it highly plugged in, but it's also a sort of a real mosaic. With so many different countries and languages and even currencies in the same place. So, it's just made for online, which breaks through a lot of those national boundaries, as we'll see when we come to e-commerce in particular. So, in terms of size, and again, you'll be getting the slide deck. You don't have to take any notes or anything. In terms of size, but if you've got to have, if you're just starting out and you just want to concentrate on one, which the priority markets, I'd say there's three. If you just go for those three, Germany, UK, France, you've got 50% of the EU GDP. And as well, again, which becomes very important for e-commerce, those are spheres of influence in which you get cross-border sales. So Scandinavians buy from Britain, Austrians buy from Germany. Northern Spaniards buy from France, etc. So there you go. That's why Europe is perfect for an online strategy.
Hey, Susanna, how about we run the first poll at this point?
Good thinking. Thank you, Bill. Wonderful. Good idea.
So what I'd like to do here is let's see. I'm going to run a poll here, and the question is, which are your European export target markets? And so all you need to do is you need to select which ones are there for you. And we'll see, okay, we're getting some voting already. So Germany, France, and the UK is coming up very nicely. Interesting. So we'll share with you later, but thank you for that. So Susanna, we have everyone attending is looking at Germany. Over 3/4 are looking at France, and just under half are looking at Italy.
Italy, okay.
And about just under 3/4 are also looking at other European countries. So that's
okay.
Great to see. All right, Susanna, back to you.
Thank you, Bill. Just before we get started again, the one slide I wanted to share with you is just sort of what I would call sort of the myth busters. And I know that you probably all know this already, but let's just set some of the scene. The first is clearly Google differentiates each market. Google and search engines say if you're in the US, you want to be US focused. So your US website is a US website. It doesn't even work very well in the UK, which is the same language. So Google in the US is different from Google in the UK, let alone all the different other languages. The next one is obviously a lead on from that. If you're search engine optimized in one market, it does not follow that you're optimized for any other markets. Language alone, even within the US and the UK, there are differences. And the third myth, clearly today, you have to have social media as a core part of any web strategy. Just want to get that through. Then we want to talk also now about some of the key trends in e-commerce today. And the good news is that the USA and Europe basically have the same trends going on. A lot of the numbers that you can find about e-commerce today, they come from all different kinds of places, and they're very varied. You get anything from, in terms of growth rates, for example, I've seen Ernst & Young is talking about 18% in Europe. InMarketer is talking about 23%. Someone else is talking about 12%. I'm not sure. What I can say is that it's double digit, and that it has been double digit for a couple of years, and that it's persistently so going on, both for the US and the Europe. So we know that it's high growth and it's persistent. The next point, which Bill mentioned, B2B, business to business, is double the size of business to consumer. So when you think e-commerce, a lot of people automatically just think about buying shoes online. No, it's business to business. People are buying parts, devices, widgets online. And if they're not doing the actual transaction online, they are certainly looking at people's websites and judging the companies and their status and their reliability on their website. So again, if you have a key target market, an export market, think about how that export market finds you, locates you, deals with you, and thinks about your brand. There's a table there in the bottom, but you can see basically B2B about twice the size of B2C, and the growth rates, are still very, very strong. In both sides. Other trends. The other major one is m-commerce.
Actually, Susanna, let me just jump in. Let's just figure out who's using e-commerce right now. So I'm going to run another poll now, and I'm actually going to share the results with you at the end of this. So here the question is, do you use e-commerce? I do understand that obviously we have some people in the consultancy space right now, so it might not be relevant for you personally, but very keen to understand who is actively using e-commerce, in other words, has some kind of e-commerce space on their site. Interesting. So actually, Susanna, this is great because we have a good group of people who aren't doing so now, but plan to in the next few months. So that I think is critical.
Good.
Let me show you what that looks like. I'm just going to share those results, and there we go. So we have a good representation here of a mixture of people here. Susanna, back to you.
Thank you very much. So m-commerce, obviously, any website today has to be enabled for your smartphones and your iPads and your tablets. In fact, Google made this part of their algorithm for ranking websites. And today, certainly in the US and the UK and across Europe, more and more people are looking and actually doing the transactions on their phones and tablets. So remember this as well. It is a very fast-growing business. It's basically doubling at the moment every year. The next major trend that I just wanted to highlight, which is very important for exporters, is the value of cross-border e-commerce. And this is what I referred to when I talked about these spheres of influence, like the sphere of influence of, say, Germany stretching beyond its national borders into, obviously, the German-speaking areas, but even beyond that. I mean, the Nordics, for example, they all spend, they seem to spend all their money, a lot of their money going into the UK, for example. They buy a lot into the UK. Equally, UK consumers buy directly into France and Germany. This is not just also consumers, it also is about business to business. So these numbers I have here is B2C. because I couldn't find the right numbers on B2B, but we know that it is just as prevalent and strong. And this is also being pushed by the EU and the Commission in Brussels. That little sort of blue blurb on the right-hand side of that slide is the cover of a document for e-commerce in Europe, which is basically about a policy to encourage cross-border e-commerce, which I think is a very interesting one for that. Then finally, just here, just to conclude this aspect, I wanted to have just encapsulated in one slide the 5 things that we think are really important for anybody looking at international e-commerce. And they apply to anyone interested in domestic e-commerce too, but just as important and arguably more so for your international e-commerce. Obviously, compliance with regulation. Next is payment methods, localized, in other words, currencies, and so on, and secure, minimum fraud. Delivery, returns policy is absolutely essential. And then finally, a website which enables people to find you, judge you, deal with you, interact with you, and so on. So a country-specific website. Now I'm going to go very fast over the first the first 4 aspects of this, because we have other webinars in which we deal only specifically with, say, logistics or returns policies and regulations, and then spend a bit more time on the aspect about webinars, about websites. But just to go very quickly about the first 2. First, obviously, rules and regulations. That's import duties and value-added tax. Note that we're having a webinar in, I think it's early January, specifically about value-added tax in Europe, which there's some major changes which you have to be aware of. But basically, rules, regulations, import taxes, and value-added tax needs to be compliant. And then for the web, there are 3 aspects which are pan-European: privacy and data protection, cookie policy, and safe harbor. And then there's one major one which is very country-specific. It's German and Germanic sites, which has to do about authorship, really, and website ownership, called Impressum. Now, all of these aspects are all about protecting personal and corporate data and how you manage and store them. Those are basically all what it's about. There's an anti-Snowden effect here. Changes do still happen. There was a recent one to Safe Harbor, for example, which was a pretty major change. You have to be compliant. It's very important to be compliant. We know for a fact that some of our clients, for example, in some parts in Europe, were recently contacted because they, it was unclear whether they had something, and then became clients of ours, and now have a clear policy about regulation on their internet. So it's really becoming a major issue across Europe. The next, really about sort of payments, deliveries, and returns. Obviously, they have to be easy and very local. For us, it's important to have that local atmosphere to make it easy for people to pay. And payment is very different across Europe. There are some countries, for example, the UK, France, surprisingly enough, Italy, where people naturally pay with a credit card or a debit card. Over 50% pay with a credit card or a debit card. In places like Germany, that's under 20%. Nearly 40% of German consumers and businesses pay online only after receipt of merchandise. So it's a very different strategy there. And in terms of your logistics for stocking, for returns, everybody, this is a headache for many companies. A lot of people get involved with their distributors for this. In many ways, I think the end argument is just, or the end solution for that is simply outsource it. If you've got a fantastic distributor, fine, but otherwise just use some of the amazing third-party logistics companies that you can find. We've put a couple of examples there. We've got a couple of clients who are working with iPost, for example, at the moment, and they're really happy. It's going really well. So, have a look at the different possibilities, find good stockists, and there's a huge selection of stockists for e-commerce for all different sectors across Europe today. One thing I wanted to highlight was SEPA, the Single European Payments Area. which came into effect in January of this year and has really helped harmonization of online payments across all of the Euro area. So that's a good one to know as well. It really helped e-commerce. Now I want to talk about what are your channels for sales, and there's different kinds. There's basically 4 that we can identify. The first big one is simply the very huge e-commerce platforms like the shopping malls online, the Amazons and eBays and Alibabas of the world. There are also sector-specific ones to either business sectors, industry sectors, or country sectors. For example, Zalando in Germany is very much, sort of fashion items and things like that, but it's very German, to give you an example. So there's these. There are a lot of, there's some pros. It's really easy to do. There's some obvious disadvantages, though. The next one is to use your distributors and use your distributor websites. Some distributor websites are even transactional, so they'll have a payment ability on them. Some do not. Again, note that there are some significant, long-lasting, long-term disadvantages of that, and it's not really a long-term solution. The solution we like the least probably is what we call plugins, and this is like a sort of DIY thing where you have your own website in the States or in the UK, and you basically could download an app, it's called plugin, from say PrestaShop, and that allows you to have suddenly transform your site into an e-commerce site. A lot of problems with that, and we've had clients who've really come unstuck with it. So it's not our preferred, but yeah, it's real easy. Our preferred by far is to actually encourage you to have a look at long-term planning, long-term investment, and say, I need something that is specific for that area. I need a European e-commerce site, for example, or I need a US site, or I need a German site, or whatever it is. And then really that allows you to control your brand, all your marketing, your pricing, allows you to feed any distributors that you might have, and all those other big advantages. So just sort of to resume then, in that sense, country-specific websites, in our opinion, are the best solution to do that, just to be able to launch new products in new markets. So getting down to some very, very specific nitty-gritty sort of helpful hints and first steps. First one, clearly, just make sure you own your local domain name. Choose the ones that are really important, and then go out and buy them.
Hey,
Did you want to do a poll?
Hey, Susanna. Yeah, let me jump in here a second. Let's figure out who's doing. Let's figure out who's doing this. Because I'm always intrigued. You know me. I'm always intrigued by getting the data out of these surveys. So guys, the question is like, who's doing this? Who's got country-specific websites? If that ties in with the e-commerce side, that's not our issue right now. We just want to figure out who's actually doing these country-specific websites that Susanna is talking about. Obviously down the bottom, we're also interested to know whether you're adapting your social media, because if you have social media in your home country, then certainly that's a consideration for your export markets as well. Interesting. Well, look, here you go. Let me share the results with that. Take a look at that, Susanna. What do you reckon? So we have about a third of you with the URLs, 57% multilingual. We could talk a little bit about multilingual sites versus localized URLs, Susanna. I think maybe questions at the end. Geolocalized, fantastic, and
good.
Yeah, that's all good stuff. Susanna, back to you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make sure that you just emphasize the importance of just choosing which markets are important for you as a company, and then making sure that you own them. And these are not expensive. I mean, you can see if we were to buy IBT Partners Belgium, it would cost us $18, $17. And I wanted to give you this rather funny thing. Disney's just come out with Star Wars, and starwars.co.uk got you to this really funny. It was a masquerade, like a joke shop. In Birmingham or something, and you could buy these masks. And starwars.co.uk, anyone typing that in was led to this one little store which sold Halloween masks. And Disney did take a long time to extricate, and actually went to battle and legal battle to spend a lot of money, but finally won it. So starwars.co.uk is now owned by Disney. It cost them a lot of money. So that's just to sort of, make sure you own the ones that are important to you. Now, the next thing I wanted to point out was just sort of about local credibility. And here you have the sites I took. On the left-hand side, you've got what looks like James Bond sitting there. This is a UK site for Jaguar, and it's mean business. On the right-hand side, you have the United States website for Jaguar, which says "at your service," which has a little sort of Bond ring to it. But the feel of the sites are quite different. I'm not saying that you all have to spend a lot of money redesigning sites. You need to have a coherent brand strategy. But it's important to make sure that, the image you have of a truck, for example, looks like a UK lorry when you're in the UK market. So the translations we're talking about are not a word-for-word translation. They're much more an embedded sort of sinking into a culture. So make sure that your translations are really good and are done by locals. So then don't forget as well all the background, the metadata, which is so important as well. Finally, just a little sort of tip. All those rules and regulations become really important to show when you're an exporter, and especially if you're in e-commerce, that help you build trust. So part of that localization is also making sure that there's a trust and reliability to your website. Now, in terms of getting found and SEO, in Europe, it's real easy. You just need to make sure that Google likes you. Google has about a 95% market share in Europe compared to 67% in the United States. So, Google has like over 200 algorithmic parameters to fill in to rank companies. The key by anybody, absolute key is just being really active on your site and being really local on your site. So that's that. And then just a little tip here, use videos. That always helps your ranking. So country-specific search engine optimization. Again, this is one of those myth busters I wanted to just to remind you of. Google.com is very different from google.co.uk as an example, let alone google.de, google.fr.es, and so on. So you really have to make sure that you are optimizing it for each market. And so some of the things we wanted to put out, again, some boosters, some tips we wanted to highlight for you. Make sure you have the right content. And then what's really useful to do, what we do for a lot of our clients, is to make sure that they're plugged into the local associations and multipliers. That really helps as well, getting your website out there. Hosting locally is also a very good way of increasing your ranking, and of course helps you upload faster. So that's particularly good. Now, I want to talk about sort of what triggers people to actually say, I need to spend money on my website. And Bill, I don't know if I can get the last. Is there a poll, Val? Maybe this is the one prompt I.
Susanna, there is. There is, yes.
Oh my goodness. Thank you.
So it's actually perfect timing because let's look at what people are currently using as their route or their route to market, depending on where my audience is right now. We have sort of, are you going via distributor agent? So we're talking about your export markets here. Are you going direct to your client? Are you going with your own sales team? You're going via the internet. I think, Susanna, everyone's getting the hang of these polls now. They're coming in a lot quicker, which is great. Thanks. All right. So I think we have pretty much everyone voted. No, a couple more to go. A couple more who I think are going to. All right. So here we go. That's one more. Okay, I think we're good. All right. So let me close this up and show you the results of that. So here we go. This is actually great. So we have just over half of you going via distributor or agent. And I think bear in mind Susanna's comments on who owns your space in a given country, and similar percentages with own sales team or via internet and e-commerce right now. So Susanna, great, thank you. Back to you.
So just very quickly, I wanted to share with you just in the list form some of the responses we've had from our clients. What triggered them to actually say, that's it, I absolutely need a dedicated digital online space. to centralize all my export business in that market. And very often it's a specific event like trade fairs or like that, but it could also mean sort of a certain level of business and saying I'm going to help my distributors here. Or else for e-commerce, I'm going to, I've got some serendipitous business coming in every now and then. I'm going to capitalize on that and actually, I think there is actually appetite in that market and go for it. I'm not going to wait till for years before I find the right distributor. I'm going to go for it and do this. So that's some of the main triggers that we found. So we list 7 in total triggers that we found from our markets. So, for example, in terms of trade fairs, and again, these numbers, when I say something like, country-specific website marketing, 40% more leads, these numbers they're just, they're worth what they're worth. This happens to be our personal finding for what we've done with our clients. If they've got a trade fair about 6 weeks ahead of time, we'll start seriously, major marketing push on their website, and that has definitely increased their leads, and I've put as an average about 40%, sometimes more, for them. And then again, some tips, particularly if you've got an ongoing, if you're going to an annual trade show, and something that really helps also to make sure that you own that space. It really is a great way of extending the leads that you make at that trade show, extending them throughout the year, building on them, and building on the time and resources spent on trade shows. The last little slide really about metrics and return on investment. Again, we've got a whole webinar just on this. It's absolutely key, especially for e-commerce. If you've got B2B or B2C e-commerce, if you've got someone who's coming onto your website, looking at your product, downloading a video of how to do something on your product, hovering over the buy button, and then doesn't click the shopping cart equivalent, why not? And the one thing about the web is you can be very reactive. We use a whole bunch of different tools and software to monitor user experience and advise clients about how best to tweak their websites to increase the final sell-through from either consumers or businesses. So it's something you should definitely build into any strategy that you have for the online side. I've taken up a little bit more time than we thought. Hope that we still have a little bit of question time. I don't know if any questions have come in, Bill.
Susanna, that was awesome, by the way. That was great. I've got a much better handle on this whole e-commerce space now. We have had a good few questions actually, and I know we are running a little short on time, but I think let's try and take a couple of these. One of the questions was actually, I think this might be a good one for Michael, if Michael's still around.
I'm still here, Bill.
Great. Question came, you mentioned Safe Harbor at one point, Suzanne, and the question came in, wasn't there some changes on Safe Harbor, and what's the impact of those changes? Michael, is that a good one for you?
Yeah, I'm happy to cover that one. Absolutely right. At the beginning of October, the European Court of Justice ruled that the Safe Harbor Agreement was invalid, tearing up 15 years worth of international agreement in one day. The impact of that is still being worked out, but really the message that really comes over for me on this one is that Europe is very tight on rules and regulations, and particularly on the enforcement of data privacy and personal protection around information held on people, and they don't like it going outside Europe. And the second one is really that the rules are changing. You can't assume that they're going to be the same, and you need to keep up with them. So a lot's happening on that, and we're still trying to work out the best answers for Safe Harbor while the lawyers discuss it.
Great, Michael, thank you. Actually, here's one I can deal with. How do we deal with local distributors when you start to sell directly with e-commerce? That's always a difficult one. I think the first point, let me think about this. The first point to note on this is that who do you want to own your market? Do you actually just want to hand over your market to your local distributors? That can be fine. But if those relationships ever go sour, we do have quite a lot of experience where that does create some complication. So we would always argue that the companies we deal with in the export space should, wherever possible, own their space and provide full service through their sites. If you have great distributors, then work alongside them, absolutely. But it's very important that, for example, that you yourselves own the URLs for your company and you are able to control the space, whether it's the marketing side of it, the online presence side of it, or even the e-commerce side of it. But yes, make sure you're working with good distributors, but make sure also that you guys own the space. I think probably got time for one more. Michael, I think this is again for you. Top two or three things to look for a US company using e-commerce in the EU. That's quite a complicated one. Can you handle that one, Michael?
Okay, Bill, I will give you three tips on this one, and it's not just US companies looking at Europe, but for anyone who's looking at a multilingual shopping cart or e-commerce platform. The first one is that you need to be very careful as to which e-commerce platform you choose. Many will be able to do the multilingual side for their products, but only the best will really be able to allow you to adapt the error message handling and the sort of process handling into each language. We have some examples where that has happened, where you're buying in one language and your error message saying you filled out the form comes back in English. The second one is to make sure that the journey from the point someone enters to the point someone buys your product is as simple and as short as possible. Every click that someone goes through will cost you sales, basically. And the third one is mobile friendly. Mobile commerce is coming through, so you have to be very careful of that one.
Michael, thank you. I'm just aware of time, and so there are a few more questions that came in, but we can come back to